Welcome to the Autism Infocast. I'm Peter Clark, founder and chairman of the Autism Info Center. Our podcasts delve into every part of autism and neurodiversity, and we want to help you spread understanding, respect, and kindness for those whose lives are affected. Whether you're autistic yourself, or whether you know or care for someone who's autistic, or maybe you just come into contact with autistic people in everyday life. Either way, please feel free to check out our hundreds of articles, videos, books, and training courses at autisminfocenter.org. And I'll leave you now in the capable hands of today's hosts, Jemima and Theo. Over to you.
Welcome to another podcast. Today, we're taking a journey into something really fundamental to the autistic experience, how the world is perceived, through the senses. And we're not just talking about fleeting sensations here. These can be really intense, profound experiences that genuinely shape daily life. So what does this all mean for understanding autism?
Well, our mission in this podcast is to take a focused exploration into this fascinating world of sensory processing differences. They're incredibly common in autism. We'll be looking at both oversensitivity, which is hypersensitivity, and also undersensitivity or hyposensitivity, and what these actually mean across all the senses, not just the ones we usually think of. The aim is, twofold. Deepen your understanding and also offer some practical strategies for autistic people themselves and for those who support them, helping create more comfortable, more inclusive environments.
Okay, so when we talk about this autistic sensory world, it's really crucial to get that the autistic brain processes sensory information differently, like fundamentally differently. This isn't a choice, right? Or just a preference. It's a neurological thing. Could you maybe unpack that difference a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of it less like a simple volume knob for the senses, maybe more like the brain's internal filter or its integration system working uniquely. So for some people, that filter might seem too wide open. It lets every single bit of sensory input just rush in, completely unfiltered. For others, it might be, more restrictive. They need a lot more input to even register something is there. These differences tend to fall into two main camps. First, there's hypersensitivity. That's the oversensitivity. This is where everyday stuff, sights, sounds, textures, things most people barely notice, can feel overwhelming, distracting, even physically painful sometimes. Imagine just being constantly bombarded.
Wow, yeah.
And then you've got the flip side. Hyposensitivity, undersensitivity. Here, a person is, less sensitive to sensory input than most people. They often need a much higher intensity of experience to feel sort of regulated, or even just to acknowledge the input is happening. This often leads to what we call sensory-seeking behaviors. They're actively looking for stronger input, maybe to feel more engaged with their environment.
Right. And what's really interesting, I think, is that it's pretty common for an autistic person to have, a mix of both, isn't it? Hypersensitivities and hyposensitivities across different senses. It's not just, all one way or all the other.
Oh, definitely not. No. It's a highly individual sensory profile for each person. And like you alluded to earlier, it's not just about the classic five senses either. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. The human sensory world is way more complex than that, and autism can influence, all aspects of it.
Okay, so now we've got this picture of a really diverse sensory world. How do these differences actually show up in daily life across these different senses? Let's start with sight, visual sensitivity. What does hypersensitivity look like there? Okay,
so for someone who's visually hypersensitive, think about things like bright sunlight or even the flicker from fluorescent lights, in a supermarket or an office. That can be genuinely painful. It might cause intense headaches, maybe disorientation, sometimes even nausea. That's why you might see someone preferring sunglasses inside, or they might actively look for rooms that are dimly lit.
Makes sense. And the opposite. What about someone who's visually hyposensitive?
All right, so for them, it's more about craving visual stimulation. They might really love bright, colorful lights, maybe busy, visually complex environments. It helps them feel alert and maybe happier. They might even find, very plain minimalist spaces kind of boring or even a bit disorienting because there's not enough input.
Huh. That's a really stark contrast. Okay, how does this translate to hearing? Auditory sensitivity.
Well, for someone with auditory hypersensitivity, everyday sounds that most of us just filter out can feel incredibly loud, amplified, jarring. Think about maybe a school assembly hall.
Right.
Or a busy cafe. Even just the hum from a fridge can feel like unbearably loud. It causes real discomfort, anxiety, sometimes even physical pain. It's not just annoying, it's genuinely overwhelming.
Yeah, it sounds like trying to focus when the whole world feels like it's shouting at you.
Yeah.
And for hyposensitivity with hearing.
Exactly. Whereas someone with auditory hyposensitivity might actually seek out noise. They might love listening to really loud music, maybe enjoy noisy environments, or even create their own sounds like humming or tapping just to get that auditory input their brain needs to feel kind of set up.
Okay, moving on to touch. Tactile sensitivity. I know this is a big one for many people. What are some of the ways this shows up? Maybe beyond the obvious.
Yeah, it's really common. For hypersensitive individuals, it's often the small things, like a clothing label scratching, or even the seam inside a sock. It can feel like this constant background irritation, almost like, having a stone in your shoe you just can't get rid of. An unexpected touch, even light touch from someone else, can be really distressing, much more than just being startled.
So it's about the quality of the touch, too, not just how hard it is. What about hyposensitive tactile needs, then?
Right. Whereas a person who's hyposensitive might actively seek out touch input. They might crave that feeling of deep, firm pressure. So maybe they love really tight hugs or find weighted blankets really calming, or perhaps they enjoy the feeling of rougher textures. That deep pressure can be very, very regulating for them.
Okay, now let's group smell and taste together. Olfactory and gustatory sensitivity. What kind of challenges pop up for hypersensitive people here, especially around food?
Oh, this can be really tricky. For those hypersensitive to smell and taste, the world can feel like it's full of, invisible landmines. The smell of certain perfumes, maybe cleaning products, even just a specific food being cooked nearby could be so overpowering it causes nausea or migraines. And with food, it's not just taste, but often the texture that's the issue. Certain textures can be so off-putting it leads to a very, very restricted diet. And it's important to say, this isn't just being picky. It can really impact nutrition, social situations around meals, all sorts of things.
That's a really significant point, the ripple effect it has on life. And what about hyposensitive taste and smell?
They might be the opposite, craving really strong flavors like extremely spicy foods or intensely sour things, maybe unusually sweet tastes. They're seeking that strong sensory input just to properly register the flavor. And similarly with smell, they might be drawn to strong smells that other people might find quite unpleasant.
So beyond those 5, you mentioned other senses like balance, the vestibular system, and body awareness, proprioception. How do these play out differently for autistic people?
Yeah, these are super important too. For balance or the vestibular sense, someone who's hypersensitive might feel dizzy or unsteady really easily, even with quite subtle movements. So things like spinning or quick changes in direction might feel very uncomfortable, maybe even sickening. But then someone who's hyposensitive might seek out those very movements. They might love spinning, rocking, swinging, because they need that intense vestibular input to feel kind of grounded and aware of their body.
Okay.
And then there's proprioception. That's our body's sort of internal GPS, knowing where our limbs are in space without having to look. Someone hyposensitive to proprioceptive input might have difficulty with coordination, maybe seem clumsy, bump into things a lot, or struggle with tasks needing fine motor control. So to compensate, they often seek activities that give really strong feedback to their muscles and joints. Things like jumping, pushing heavy furniture, or, again, finding comfort in weighted blankets. That deep pressure helps them feel where their body actually is.
It really is fascinating just how diverse and specific these experiences can be for each person. Okay, so when all this sensory information becomes too much, it leads to sensory overload, right? What does that actually look like, and why is it so impactful?
Sensory overload is basically, it's like a system shutdown. The brain gets overwhelmed by just too much input, too much data coming in. It can't process it all efficiently, and this leads to intense anxiety and often what people call either a meltdown or a shutdown. A meltdown is usually an externalized response, maybe crying, shouting, agitated behavior. A shutdown is more internalized. The person might become withdrawn, very quiet, unresponsive, maybe unable to speak. Why one happens versus the other is, complex and individual.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's the brain trying desperately to cope with an unbearable amount of sensory information.
So it's not just being emotional, it's a neurological response. Okay, given these huge challenges, what are some practical strategies people can use? You mentioned a kind of personal sensory toolkit earlier.
Yeah, exactly. A personal sensory toolkit is really, really helpful. This might include practical things like noise-canceling headphones, or maybe more discreet earplugs for loud places, sunglasses, maybe tinted lenses for bright lights. Fidget toys can be great too, providing a necessary outlet for tactile or proprioceptive needs. And things like weighted blankets or lap pads offer that calming deep pressure we talked about.
Makes sense. What about controlling the environment itself?
Yeah, environmental control is another powerful strategy. This is about deliberately creating a sensory-friendly safe space, usually at home, like a personal area where you can manage the sensory input. Maybe a quiet corner with soft lighting, comfy cushions, calming objects. Even simple things like using blackout curtains or putting lights on dimmer switches can make a big difference in managing the home environment.
Okay, and preparation.
Absolutely. Planning and preparation are crucial. This could mean things like visiting a shopping center or supermarket during quieter hours, or maybe looking at photos of a new place online before you go, just to reduce the sensory surprises. And always having an exit strategy in mind, knowing you can leave if you start feeling overwhelmed in a new situation. These proactive steps can really lower anxiety.
Okay, so individuals can do a lot for themselves. But how can the rest of us, family, friends, colleagues, how can we help? And maybe beyond just immediate adjustments, what are some of the longer-term impacts of living with sensitivities that aren't managed well or needs that aren't met?
That's a really important question because it gets to the heart of why community support is just so vital. Unmanaged sensitivities can lead to things like chronic stress, definitely anxiety, sometimes social isolation because people start avoiding situations they know will be overwhelming, even physical symptoms like headaches or stomach issues. And for unmet hyposensitivity needs, well, that can result in difficulty with self-regulation, maybe restlessness, or challenges with focus and learning. So creating a supportive environment really is a team effort. And honestly, even small adjustments by non-autistic people can make a huge difference.
So for those of us who want to help, what's the best starting point? Should we just guess what someone needs?
Oh, definitely not guessing. A great first step is simply to communicate and ask. Never assume you know what someone needs or prefers. The best approach is just to ask them directly, respectfully. Simple questions like, is the music too loud for you? Or, is there anything I can do to make this space a bit more comfortable? That open communication builds trust.
Right, just ask. Okay. And what about thinking about my own impact on someone's sensory world?
Yes, that's key too. Being mindful of your own sensory impact. Things you might not even register, like wearing strong perfume or aftershave, maybe even the scent from your laundry detergent. These can be really unpleasant, sometimes overwhelmingly distracting for someone who's hypersensitive. Little details matter.
And where possible, try to be proactive and adapt the environment. Is that right?
Exactly. Offer to make simple changes. Things that might seem minor to you could be really significant for someone else, like offering to dim the lights or turn down the TV volume, maybe closing a door to cut down background noise. These actions show you're considerate and help create a more accommodating space.
It really comes down to respect, doesn't it? Which I guess also extends to personal space.
Absolutely. Unexpected touch can be really jarring, sometimes distressing for many autistic people. So always ask before, say, giving a hug or even just touching someone's arm. Respecting those physical boundaries is fundamental for creating comfort and a feeling of safety.
Okay. And finally, you mentioned understanding stimming. Can you elaborate a bit on what that involves for listeners who might not be familiar?
Sure. Stimming, which stands for self-stimulatory behavior, is often a natural and, frankly, necessary behavior for self-regulation for many autistic people. It can look like lots of different things, maybe hand flapping, rocking back and forth, making vocal sounds, or fiddling with an object. It's often the brain's way of either increasing sensory input when it's needed or decreasing it when things feel overwhelming, basically trying to achieve a state of calm or focus. So unless a stim is actually causing harm, it really should be accepted, not judged or suppressed, because it's often a vital coping mechanism.
This really brings up a big question then. If we genuinely want to create a world where everyone can thrive, what's the main takeaway from everything we've discussed about sensory processing?
I think the biggest takeaway is that understanding and managing sensory sensitivities is absolutely fundamental to autistic well-being. And it really is a partnership. It involves autistic people developing their own strategies, knowing their own needs, yes. But it also requires a wider community, family, friends, workplaces, society being willing to listen, to learn, and importantly, to make those compassionate adjustments. By working together, we can really help create a world that feels less overwhelming, much more accommodating, and allows everyone, whatever their sensory profile, to feel safe, comfortable, and truly able to thrive.
Thanks for listening to this Autism Infocast from the AutismInfoCenter.org.
Thank you, Jemima and Theo. I'm sure we've all learned something there today. Don't forget to visit AutismInfoCenter.org to hear our other episodes, browse our library of articles, see our inspiring range of books, watch our videos about autism and neurodiversity, and find out about training courses that can help you or your organisation make the world a safer, happier and more meaningful place for us all. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please feel free to spread the word about Autism Info Centre. A quick mention on your socials is always appreciated. Until next time, this is Peter Clark from autisminfocentre.org. Have a great day.